Hello, I'm your host, Sean Aaron, and welcome to Dem Bois Podcast. This show is a platform where trans men of color voices can be amplified as we share our transitional stories and many other issues that are relatable to trans men of color and our existence. This show is not only to amplify our voices, but to raise awareness and conversation around our lived experiences. Welcome to Dem Bois Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Aaron, he, him, his. And my next guest, he's a father, he's a trans advocate, he's a husband, but most importantly, he's my brother. Welcome to the show, Luckie.
What's going on? My name is Luckie Alexander. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing excellent, doing wonderful. Good to see you. Good to have you here. It's a pleasure.
Likewise.
Like, anybody who don't know of you should know of you. So I'm glad to have you here.
I appreciate you 100%. All them good pronouns is he, him, his, Superman.
Got you. All right. So Superman.
Yeah.
So the name Luckie. I love to ask folks like how did the name choose you? Not you choosing the name, because of course, right, the name had to choose you. So Luckie, how did that name choose you?
Well, I was born a little premature, and I was 2 pounds, 3 ounces when I was born. And I had showed up 2 months early. And so the doc told my parents that, I wasn't going to make it past my first birthday. And so here I am 42 years later. And I'm not small by any measure, 5'11", a good 250. But I'm as healthy as can be. And so it was a nickname that followed me through life. And so when I did change my name, I chose that as a middle name. My first name is actually Alexander. And so community actually gave me the name Luckie Alexander because one of our community mothers here that has looked out for me quite a bit within community presented me to the city as Luckie Alexander, and it stuck.
That's cool. Yeah. So everybody call you Luckie. So you prefer Luckie or you prefer Alexander?
No, absolutely prefer Luckie. Like I said, Alexander was put first as a way to be able to get jobs. And so although I wanted Luckie to be before Alexander in my name, I put Alexander first. That way I could get jobs.
Ain't that sad that we can't honor ourselves in the names that we want to be called based on systems and what people's perceptions of our names? That's kind of crazy.
Absolutely. And that's, working in the employment field with our trans folks. I know what that looks like. I know, the struggles that they go through, especially around names. And so when I chose mine, I wanted something that sounded strong. And that, like my first name being Alexander was chosen because, even though I'm not a fan of what Alexander the Great did, I'm a fan of the way he moved. I'm a fan of the determination, the tenacity, because he was always told that he couldn't do X, Y, and Z. And he proved time and time again that he was going to do it regardless. And so not necessarily what he did, because he did some atrocious things, but it was the way that he went about doing those things.
Yeah, definitely. If I think of something great, when I think of great, I think of you. Like you are definitely somebody great. So
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So just give us a recap of your transitional journey. So from the beginning into what it looks like now for you.
Well, transition at 19 looked like social transition between 19 and around maybe nearly 30, right? So what that looked like, it looked like me just kind of standing and kind of figuring out what that looked like and standing in that truth, but also doing the research and figuring out I knew that I did not fit in the stud category or in the lesbian category, but I did know that I was in the masculine category, right? So trying to figure out what that looked like. And around that time, we're talking 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was no language around being trans at the time. There was no language around what transition looked like. And so as I got older, I saw people like Chaz Bono, and I still didn't see myself reflected. And so I figured Black folks didn't do this. And so it wasn't until I was nearly 30 that I ran into the Brown Boy Project, and there was a handful of trans men and transmasculine identities there. And I saw myself reflected. I got excited. And within 2 weeks after being at the Brown Boy Project, I was on testosterone because I also realized that I had access. So my insurance would pay for the hormone therapy. And then going forward, about 6 years ago, I had top surgery. But going through that process was hard for the first 10 years because I didn't know what it looked like for Black folks to transition. It was hard because a lot like now, there were no resources for transmasculine folks around healing, around medical, around parenting, around a lot of these different things. And so it made transition a little bit tougher than maybe some of the younger cats have it now.
Yeah, that's kind of funny that you say mention Chaz Bono, because when I came out to my mom, it's like, oh, I'm about to transition. That's the first person she thought of. She was like, oh, you trying to be like Chaz? You're going to be fat like Chaz if you transition, which was kind of a negative thing. But like that was the only person that she knew that was trans identified that was visible at that time, which is kind of unfortunate. So it's kind of true that like the youth nowadays have, well, more possibility models to look up to, like yourself and, other folks that they see in the community via social media or whatever that they can look up to. Is like, yo, that's who I want to be like. That's where I see myself. Yeah. So I know you mentioned the Brown Boy Project, and that just speaks to how we met. You want to, I really do consider you my brother. Like I got a lot of love for you. So when we say the Brown Boy Project, like first tell folks what the Brown Boy Project is. And I would love to hear your story of how we met each other.
Okay, so the Brown Boy Project is kind of like an incubator of leaders. It allows masculine folks of center or masculine center folks to be able to kind of stand in their leadership and play with what that looks like, and actually like really do some introspective work. I know the cohort that I was part of was the pivotal moment to change my life, right? Because I told Cole, who is the founder of Brown Boy, that I didn't fit because I was just a computer nerd, right? I was just a computer tech. I knew how to do all of the fancy things with technology, right? And I didn't think that I fit into the advocacy space. And it was Cole that told me, we need everybody. Everybody has a place. Everybody has a space to be in. And we need all of those different skill sets. And so I was like, okay. I'll settle into this and really give it a shot because that's what my heart was, right? But I had to figure out how computer tech worked for that, and it did. I ended up creating my own organization out of it. And as far as like how we met, I know that Brown Boy played a big part in that, and there were several different instances in which, but I think the one instance where we kind of solidified a lot of that was the Brown Boy reunion. Yep, it was one of the Brown Boy reunions in Oakland.
So I remember meeting you because of the Brown Boy Project, but I also followed you on social media. But you came out to the Bay Area when you had your top surgery. You ring a bell?
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And you were one of the only folks that came and visited me when we were out there in the Bay. And that was about 6 years ago. Yeah. And you had contacted me, it was through social media, and we ended up linking up, and you were one of the only folks that drove me around, and we just kind of got out of the hotel and got to breathe. And yes, you're absolutely right.
You're absolutely you some right. Sunshine, got to show you the Bay a little bit. We went a little bit of shopping and yeah.
And that was our first connect. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, for sure. But for folks that don't know, we can also say we traveled the world together, right?
So absolutely. South Africa. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we went to South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa together for 2 weeks. It was a part of another leadership development project. And we just went there. We hung out. We ate good food together. We stayed together. We built community together. So
yeah, we hit London, and there was one other spot that we hit on the way and on the way back. I know one was London. I can't remember where else we laid over, but yeah, it was a cool adventure with you. It was, and I think that trip particularly solidified a lot of our brotherhood, a lot of our friendship. Although we did have a lot of friendship and brotherhood between us, I think that trip we connected in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. And also, like in the leadership retreats, you get to build with folks in the home because we lived together in the house for a week, and you got to, share space with each other, eat with each other. So it definitely builds a different kind of community and relationship amongst each other, for sure.
True. Yeah.
So you said that you started your own organization. Do you want to tell us more about that?
Yeah. So the organization is called Invisible Men. And it started in 2018, again, out of the lack of resources that I personally had when I transitioned. And so I said, well, if I can help it, then other folks that are in my position don't have to go through that, right? Don't have to look for themselves to be reflected within either social media, online presence, or even in person, right? And so I built a website that acts as a platform to allow transmasculine folks. And that's from the trans men, the binary trans man, all the way to the non-binary individual that identify somewhere on the masculine spectrum. And we provide the resources and things that folks need. So whether it's a binder or it's a hug, we make sure that folks have the things they need. And a lot of the programs that we offer right now are going to be around healing, around emotional support, things that men in general, masculine individuals in general, don't get a chance to access. And as transmasculine folks, we have a different access to our emotions, and we have a different relationship to our emotions, being that when we are perceived as feminine identified folks or female identified folks, there's a certain space for emotional release that those folks have access to, that when you transition and you look a specific kind of way, especially when you look hyper masculine, that you no longer have access to. And when we did that, we uncovered that men in general, or masculine individuals in general, don't have that space. And even more so for our transmasculine folks, we needed that space to relieve things like suicidal ideation, or to relieve things that they had been through and didn't have any space to release a lot of those emotions and feelings. And so we wanted to make sure that folks had access to not only that space, but other healing spaces around. We do scholarships around transitional needs, and that transitional need can be your rent, or it could be just moving through life, whatever that looks like for folks. We want to make sure that we didn't pigeonhole ourselves into a specific definition of what that was, because transitional needs could be anything for us.
So does Invisible Man, does it cater just to trans masculine men of color, or is it just anyone that identifies as trans masculine?
So we prioritize our people of color, but we also don't leave anyone out, because we understand as trans masculine folks, regardless of color or creed, they still need those resources. But we definitely focus and prioritize our people of color, because that's a different journey, that's a different walk, and those challenges look much different than our white counterparts.
Yeah, definitely. I know I was checking out your website, and I was looking for something, because I know you created a short documentary some years back. So I went looking for it, and that's on your website, correct?
Yes, it's on the website.
Want to let folks know what that website is?
So the website is Invisible T Men. So it's invisible, the letter TMEN.org. And yes. So, yes, there is a short doc that we did when we released the website that kind of talks to a couple of different transmasculine individuals, including one individual that's not transmasculine, is my mom. And so it gives like what that perspective looks like from their eyes. One thing about the storytelling platform is we call our folks legacies, because it's non-binary, but it also speaks to what they're leaving behind, like allowing other folks to see possibility models, like myself and others, on the website, and they get to tell their stories in their own words. We believe that storytellers should be able to tell their stories and be able to own those stories. So we don't edit, we don't go back and change anything about their stories, because even things like typos or grammatical errors could tell something about a person, right? And we want to make sure that their truth and their authenticity stays intact. And so currently there are 60 legacies that have told their stories and stood on our platform to give other folks something to look at. That way, like for us, we know we have to see us in order to be us. And so that's why the platform is so incredibly important.
Yeah. And I'm one of the 2020 legacies. So on there, you can go on the website and see my bio and read a little bit more about me and all the other legacies. But I just smile really big. Folks can't see me, but I smile really big when you mention your mom, Sherry. I want your mom. I wish she was my mom. But and this is one of the reasons why I mentioned the documentary, because I did want to mention your mom. And every time, from the first time I see it and every time I've seen it thereafter, I get emotional when I see your mom. I feel like her story, I'm not gonna spoil it, but I think that folks should go on the website and check it out. But I feel like her story should it should be a template for other mothers. Like what your mom said was just so real and so genuine, and I get super emotional every time I see it. And I don't know your mom, but I love your mom. And just based on that story that she told about her experience with you as her child, it just speaks volumes to who you are, and me knowing you personally, like knowing your personality and just how you show up in spaces and that you loved. And it just warms my heart. It really gets me emotional every time I see that video. And I feel like, how like at Pride events they have those booths where moms give out hugs. I think your mom should have a booth and she giving out hugs to other parents.
You know what? It's really cool because my mom is one of those parents that understands that she didn't get it right, right? But also, as the kid that she didn't get it right with, right? At the beginning, I had to allow her grace because I was the first of six, right? And so as a parent, I know that you screw up the first one because guess what? This is the first time people have been parents, right? And at that particular time, she didn't know what she was looking at. And like I was saying, when I started the transition at 1920, there was no language for trans. So let's go back another 20 years at my birth. And when I was younger, there was definitely no language or anything to tell her what she was looking at. Right. And so my mom is one of those that, one, she's a part of our organization. She's a director of our parent programs. And what she does is she goes out, she talks to other parents of trans people and also talks to trans people about how to communicate with their parents and engage with their parents in ways that make sense for them, to kind of figure out what does that look like for them to work cohesively together and the parent to understand what that trans person is going through. Because my mom didn't get it up until, maybe 6 years ago. And our relationship was relatively new. But once she did get it and she did sit down with me and we had one of those long conversations where I was like, look, mom, check it out. I got to tell you who I am and I need you to hear me. I need you to see me as an adult so that we can have this conversation and be respectful about it. And she was up for it. And we had that conversation and she understood where I was coming from. She understood who I was. And she said, okay, I got it. Now just teach me what the language is. Teach me what the pronouns are. Teach me the things that I need to know in order to better respect you. Because one thing that I do know as a trans person is you have to allow the family that loves and supports you as you transition. You have to allow them to transition with you, right? Because we've had that time in our heads to understand who we are and how we want to move and navigate and present in life. But we have to give everybody else time to catch up. Right. And so that was something that I knew for myself that I needed to give my mom that grace in order for her to catch up to where I was. Right. And she did. And now she does that for other folks. Now she's given other parents that same quote unquote instruction on how to really engage with their kids in a way that's affirming and loving.
When you speak on giving your mother grace, what is the difference for folks that's listening? What is the difference between giving, extending grace to your parents versus extending grace to a toxic parent and someone who's not going to get in and it's a parent that they want? Like what advice would you give for that? Like that distinction between the two?
Right. And so I give the distinction in that my mom was willing to learn. And if she slipped up every once in a while, because, like when I transitioned or when I came to her, I was already 30. And so she had gotten used to calling me a specific name for 30 years, right? And calling me by a specific pronoun for 30 years. And so me understanding as an adult that it's going to take her a little minute to shift that, right? To transition along with me. But also I know that she was trying. Right. And so the difference for me was I saw that you were coming from a place of love and I saw that you were coming from a place of I'm trying to work through this and see you exactly for who you are. And I knew that it wasn't going to be an overnight change, but there are toxic parents who don't try. They don't give it a shot. They're not interested in learning. And so that's where the distinction comes in for me. When it comes from a learning place, then grace can be extended. But if it's not a learning place and you just choose not to care, then that's toxicity for me.
So what bit of advice would you give to somebody who says, hey, my parent is not willing to learn, regardless if you're 16, 17, or even if you're 30, 35, 40 years old, my parent does not want to learn. What would you suggest someone do in that situation?
I would suggest finding some chosen family. I would suggest finding and surrounding yourself with people that are supportive, that do want to love on you, that do want to be there for you. And I know how hard it is to look for family. I know how hard it is to have or acquire folks in your space to kind of give you that. But know that there's a community out here that will love on you, that will bring you in, that will help you get through this. And we're part of that community and we're here for you.
Yeah, most definitely. I know my mom, she was well, I spoke about it in the previous episode, but my mom, when I first came out, I came out as lesbian and my mom wasn't having it. So she actually kicked me out of the house. So I was homeless for some time. And as you know, coming out as trans was a whole nother issue with her. And I tried to extend a little bit of grace. I gave her some time because you're right. You know, like I started to transition when I was in my 30s. So my mom calling me a name for 30 years it is definitely hard and they're transitioning with you. But there was a point where it was toxic and I gave her a little space and I reintroduced myself again. And she slowly has started to kind of like want to learn. So she don't necessarily do the right pronouns. So she just won't say any at all. She'll just call me by my name. And that's fine. You know, at least you tried and you
Right,
making that effort. You know what I mean?
right. The
Yeah.
effort is there. But I would also tell some of these youth out here that maybe have toxic parents or they feel like their parents don't see them, give them some time. Cause like I said, sometimes they're not going to come around. Okay. And that's just the truth of it. Right. And I'm going to be honest about that. Sometimes they don't come around, but there are some parents, like I went through 30 years of my mom not understanding who I was or how I navigated. Right. And even coming out the first time, there was a little trepidation there and there was a little challenge and struggle. But at some point they may come around, right? I can't speak for all parents, but some parents may be at first resistant, but some may come around. So you just kind of got to gauge it and maybe not completely give up on them, but just love them from a distance, while looking for and acquiring that chosen family that is going to give you that unconditional love and support.
And that's really good advice. My question is like, do you and your mom ever conversate about the conversations that she may have with other parents?
Absolutely.
Uh,
That's a conversation we talk about a lot. That's something that because she doesn't know how to have those conversations sometimes, right? Because we have parents that are just like, I don't want to deal with this kid. And literally a lot of those times it's like, hey, this is your child. This is the baby that you had long ago and now as an adult, and this is where they are. This is how they choose to live their lives as an adult or even as young people, right? These are choices that we now have, and this is where the autonomy comes in. And she really kind of breaks some of that stuff down and is like, hey, but she's also able to talk to them in language that they understand, because a lot of our parents that we do engage with don't have that same like advocacy speak that we have, right? And so she's able to talk to them in parent terms, in parent speak. And so sometimes it's very effective and sometimes it's just not. And for those folks, then, we provide that extra support. We make sure that somebody can show up for them.
Hey, thank you for tuning into the podcast. This week's episode is with Luckie Alexander. After this episode, we'll be taking a short break and we will be back in September with all new topics, all new guests, hosted by myself, Sean Aaron. Is there like a number one reason that you found and your mom has found that makes parents most resistant to coming around to their child?
Yes, fear. And it's not necessarily their kid. It's fear of how the rest of the world will treat them and them not wanting to let this child go out into the world and be themselves and get hurt. Right. And so a lot of the parents come back with this fear of what may happen to their kid if they're authentic, instead of thinking about what happens if they're not. right?
Absolutely.
Because if they're not authentic for some of those kids, it equates to trauma or loss of life. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? And we know for our transmasculine individuals that that rate of suicidality is at 55% when our general population is 14.9. So we're talking about almost we're talking about over 3 times what the general population is, and that a lot of that, because the research shows a lot of that comes from lack of support. It comes from not being able to express themselves. It comes from the lack of resources, but definitely the lack of support is up there at the top.
I know that for me, like if I would say, like, if I had support of my family, what the world says don't even matter. You know what I mean? So just to segue that me and you both are fathers, right? And so when my son, I don't care what you do, as long whatever you're gonna do, be the best at it that you're gonna be.
Absolutely.
And that's what I always stress. Like I don't want to put you out. I don't want to put you out into the world because the world can't love you like I'm gonna love you. So why, if fear is the thing, it's kind of it kind of confuses me. It's like if you're afraid of how the world's gonna treat your child, and why would you throw your child out into that world? So I don't know. It's sticky, and
Yeah,
parenting doesn't come with a handbook.
you're absolutely right. I wish it did.
you, you would be a wealthy man if you created a parenting handbook that works for everyone.
I'm
That, like,
telling you. But you
yeah,
know what? Because we're all individuals, because we are all very unique, that parenting handbook would be useless, right? Because
yeah, absolutely.
then everybody's the same. And our uniqueness and our differences is what makes the world fun.
No, that's absolutely true. So true. Let's speak on that fatherhood. How
And grandfatherhood now, by
Oh,
the way.
and
Yes.
grandfather, I'm not ready for that. Not at
Yeah.
all. so
Yeah.
tell us about being a father of a transmasculine identity. So, like, how many kids do you have, first off?
So I've got 4 kids. My youngest is 5. My oldest is 22. And I have most of them are girls. So 3 out of the 4 are girls, which is very interesting. And my first 2, well, the first 3 watch me transition. They watch me go through the process. And, my son, he told me, because I wanted to make him a junior. It was a thing for me. And I was like, hey, kid, he was 8. And I said, I want to change my name, but I want to make you a junior. He said, no, Dad, you have to get your own name. I said, okay, well, there's that. Right. But, like as a dad, I think I raised my kids, no different than any other dad, right? That wants the best for his kids. I wanted to make sure my kids had their education, because as Black children, their education was the one thing that no one could take from them. And it was the one thing that was going to propel them through life. I wanted to make sure that they had the best education possible, because I felt like, again, as Black kids, that if they had that education, that the world would be kind to them. But, I worry about them. I fuss at my kids. I go through the normal parent things. I mean, because I was trans doesn't make it any different or odd or unique to other kids, with the exception of the things that they deal with from other kids behind my transition. My son, especially, because me and their mom split when he was a lot younger. So he was with me most of the time. And so when we would have to register him for school or anything that had to do with his birth certificate, I had to out myself. And so because of the neighborhood that we stayed in, a lot of those kids also watched me transition. And so going from school to school was tough for him, because he got bullied quite often. And a lot of times he was bullied from staff, from school administration, and not necessarily the kids. And so having to deal with that was tough. Having to go through a lot of things as a trans man with a child was interesting, in that when you do out yourselves, you're instantly treated differently. Especially, I mean, we're talking, 15 years ago when he was a lot younger, but when you're treated like no one wants to talk to you, or you're not even there because they find out that you're trans, it's okay to do it to me, but don't do that to my kid.
Right.
Like, I'll deal with it. I'm an adult. I'll handle it. It may be something that I have to deal with later on my own as an emotional trauma, but don't do that to my kid. Right. and, having to fight those battles. And he just graduated. So I'm just glad to get him to graduation and through, and all of that is behind him now. Now he can look at colleges, and, my transition doesn't have to follow him anymore. And so that was the one thing that I think was hard about being a parent that's trans. Now my 5-year-old doesn't know anything different. She knows this daddy, and that's it. Right. And to say that only one of my children carry my bloodline, my youngest looks just like me. And I think it's the funniest thing on the planet, but I think it's the best thing on the planet as well. And now raising the kids on my own as adults, because their mom passed away last year from COVID. So it's been a different shift, because now I'm the one that they lean into for emotional stuff, and I'm the one that they lean into for everything now, right? And so that's a new shift that I'm learning to make with them, because I haven't had to be emotionally available to them on this level for a long time, because their mom, it was like, okay, like my boyfriend just broke up with me, and I'm sad about it. I was like, you probably want to talk to your mom, and now all of those things that I would have normally called her for, like, I'm handling. But my wife helps me take care of a lot of that stuff. She stepped in to handle some of that emotional stuff with them, because again, as trans men, I'm not as emotionally available as I'd like to be for them. And it's only because a lot of the things that I've dealt with, and still trying to move through a lot of things with their mom's death. And then looking at my oldest daughter, she looks just like her mom, right? And I'm like, golly, I'm trying to be here for you, but at the same time, I'm having a moment that I'm having to kind of swallow for a second to help you through this. And I just don't feel like I'm as effective as I could be. So we're still working on that. But I love being a dad, and even more so now, being a grandpa is even more fun.
Yeah, I'm not ready for that grandpa thing. How does that feel?
You know what? It feels incredible as again, as a trans person, not thinking that I was ever going to have a family as robust as the family that I have now, having grandkids. And I never thought that was a thing. I didn't even think I was going to make it to 21, let alone have grandkids. Right. Yeah. So being a grandpa is one of the best jobs that I've had since being a dad. Right. Because being a dad was awesome. But now being a grandpa or a pawpaw, and both of my grandkids are one, so now they're walking, they're talking, and they're on the video chat, and they're pawpaw. And I'm like, oh my God, like these are my grandbabies. Right. But now I get to give them back. So
yes, that is the good thing about being a grandpa.
You get to give them back.
Yeah, exactly. So you saying that your youngest doesn't know anything yet. Well, of course, the youngest is 5. So when do you think as a parent is the time to have that talk, or to educate your child on your identity?
I think when she's ready for it. I think right now, because my 5-year-old is on the spectrum, and so she may not be ready to absorb that information. And I think that when she's ready to absorb that information, then that's definitely a conversation that I would sit down and have with her, because I am very out and very open. And because of the way that I move in community, it's not a secret. So it's something she's going to find out sooner or later. So it's definitely going to be a conversation that I think we'll sit down and have with her as soon as she's ready. And that's going to vary from kid to kid. Like at 5, my son was ready. He was, he was on that level where he could have a full-fledged conversation with you at 5, right? So I knew that he could understand that. But my youngest, I think, is not ready yet for that conversation. And as soon as she is, like, intellectually and mentally ready for that conversation, we'll have it.
Yeah. I know. I can't remember exactly how old my son was when I had the conversation. I think he was like 12 or 13. I can't remember. I always get it messed up, but I had the conversation and just telling him, I just said, I'm ready to transition. He just was like, what was that? I had that long conversation with him, and he just was like, let's do it.
Right.
So, that was exciting. Right. So what would be your advice for someone who maybe they haven't transitioned yet, but they have a family, or, and they want to discuss that with their children, being that you have experience with that? What would be your advice?
Well, I would tell them, when I talk to my kids, my daughter was 10, my son was 8. And so when we sat down and we talked about it, like I talked to them in kid terms. Like, hey, I know I look like a mommy, but I actually feel like a daddy. And so I'll be shifting over into daddy status, right? And I'm gonna be a daddy and not a mommy. And they're like, okay, and so like my daughter was like, so are you going to have big muscles and are you going to do this? All of those stereotypical questions, right? And so I was like, maybe, but I might grow a beard, all these things. And so my son was like, so are you going to keep your hair? Because at the time I had hair down, down to my shoulder,
Oh, wow.
and the kids, whenever I would throw it out, the kids would play in it. It was something that it tickled them. And I was like, yeah, daddy's gonna have hair, and we're gonna do all these things, and so the more I transitioned and the more my body changed, it was just one day when my kid was just like, so you look like a dad now. Can I call you dad? And I was like,
Wow.
yeah, like like when I'm talking to him, I was real cool about it. But in my body, I swear I was jumping up and down. Like I could not wait for one of
Yeah.
my kids to say that. And, the moment that it happened, I was like, my whole heart just got super big. And I was like, I'm a dad, right? And
Yeah.
so like it was the best feeling ever. But I would tell other parents that maybe haven't transitioned yet or are on that cusp. One of the best things that I did for my kids was put them in therapy prior to really just jumping into my transition. That way, in the midst of this process, if they had questions, if there were things that came up, because I would be the antagonistic party, I would be the reason why these things came up. They had someone else to talk to that was outside of the family, that wasn't just off top going to be like, oh, that's your dad. Stop asking questions, right? I needed them to have a place to have that outlet. But also, I opened the lines of communication for them to let them know if there was any questions that they had that they could come to me. So I think that just being transparent with your child and the therapy component, like seeking that out for, especially for like LGBT therapy, like there's organizations that do youth therapy around LGBT issues. So making sure you seek out those resources is one of the best things I think I could have ever done for my kids, because it gave them that outlet. Let them be mad at me if they needed to be mad about it. Because my son for a moment was like, I miss my other mom, and I'm like, I'm still here. I'm just a dad now, and that didn't click for him right away. And so he needed to like talk that out with someone else. And so just allowing them that space to ask questions, allowing them that space to be curious about what's going on and being very transparent along the way.
That's
You know,
really, really good advice. I have never thought to have your child in therapy. Like that wouldn't have been my first choice. And I've had folks ask me like, I'm going to come out to my child. What should I do? And I have never thought of, having to have your child in therapy as a way to process this, because it is a process.
yeah, and I felt it like this as a way of giving them autonomy over their thoughts and feelings and all of the things that they were going through, and letting them know that that was okay, right? And when you give a child that space and that power over themselves to say, okay, I'm upset and that's okay for me to be upset, and then giving them that space to express those things and not being mad at them for it. I know a lot of parents that are not trans that get mad at kids for silly things, right? Like, okay, I broke a cup. They're a kid. It happens, right? But making sure that even in your transition that is about you, if there are children involved, to make sure that they have outlets and ways to express themselves as well is very important.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Thank you for that. That I really appreciate that. And then it's not just like don't be selfish in the transition, because right, you have to go to therapy too, but also think about the loved ones around you who may also need that outlet to get it out and to discuss some things.
Right. Because if we think about it, we're adults, right? We have those means and those ways to get those things out, even if it's calling up one of our friends. But a 6-year-old doesn't have a phone to call one of their friends and doesn't even have that language, right? So, but sitting down with folks that do deal with kids and understand what's happening is I think the best way to go, because these are folks that have studied to do this. And, for the most part, we vetted a lot of places to find out like who is trans confident and who does deal with kids within the LGBT spectrum, and making sure that that space is available for them, I think was one of the best things that we could have done.
I like that. Especially now, there's so many ways to find the LGBT therapists. It's,
right. You got PFLAG, and you've got resources in so many different states and areas, especially in California. There's a lot of resources for kids.
Definitely. I like that. That's good advice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So what does your life look like now? So what are you up to? What new projects? I know you're a man of many hats. What's going on with your life now?
Right now, Invisible Men is growing. We've hit our 5-year mark in our 4th year. And so everybody's really excited about it. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do for our 5th year. And so that's on the table. I'm still doing a lot of the political moves that I'm making. So I sit on the Trans Advisory Council for LA City as well as West Hollywood. I'm an HIV commissioner. And right now, I'm in everything. I'm doing a lot of HIV work around trans men in particular, because as we start to look at a lot of this data that's coming out around trans men, there's only a handful of studies that have been done around trans men sexuality and HIV risk and all of that. We're finding out that only 10% of the transmasculine population identify as straight. And even within that 10%, we're still looking at half of that for trans men that are engaging in sexual behavior with trans women, which makes them no less straight. But trans women being one of the HIV impacted populations, the risk is pretty high for trans men. And we don't know what the prevalence of HIV is just yet, because we're not being studied properly. The numbers are skewed. And so I'm doing a lot of advocacy around making sure that there's visibility for the transmasculine population within the HIV field, because if we don't do the research and we don't have the numbers, then it leads way to a lot of different things, and 2 things in particular. One, that it sends a really messed up and really dangerous message to our transmasculine population that they don't need to protect themselves, that HIV is not on their radar for risk and all of these things. But if we have 90% of our population that is engaging in sexual behaviors with people that have penises, that's going to lead to risk, right? And we look at all of the different risk factors, one of those being gender affirmation. And so a lot of the partners that some of these trans masculine folks have are using gender affirmation as a way to get things that they want, like not using a condom, like not using protection in any kind of way. And so we make sure that folks understand that protection is a thing that they need to do. Also, without this visibility, there's no funding, there's no research, there's nothing for our transmasculine community in the way of HIV prevention resources or treatment resources or all of these educational resources that are necessary. So we need to make sure that our transmasculine community has those resources, but we need the research to be done. We need all of these things around visibility to happen within the HIV arena. And then one of the other things that I'm working on is around reproductive justice. And, like this Roe v. Wade thing popped up, and a lot of folks, again, left trans men out of that conversation and transmasculine folks out of those conversations, although we are birth givers, right? And so we need to make sure that we are part of those conversations, and that us as a community start to stand up and fight against these things as well, because they do impact us greatly when it comes to family planning, fertility, reproductive, all of those things. So we need to be in those spaces as well. So those are 2 big things that I'm working on around advocacy and the role that I play and how I show up in community.
So how can folks, you saying being a part of this, how can folks show up to advocate for these 2 things that you just mentioned, HIV and also for fertility?
Bring trans folks into those conversations, bring transmasculine folks specifically into those conversations. And when you're in those spaces to advocate on behalf of other folks, make sure that transmasculine folks are mentioned. Make sure that you're asking those questions around, what does the data look like for trans folks? What does the data look like for transmasculine folks in particular, right? What are those data points that you can point me to? Because that's going to open the door. That's going to really shine some light on those holes in the research, because people are going to say, well, we don't have that research. Well, why? Right. And it's going to start to spark those conversations and spark that research to start happening more and more, the more people are asking for it. So folks that want to advocate on behalf of transmasculine folks in these particular arenas, ask for that data, ask for that information. And if you're in a position to do the research, really start to do that research. If you're in a position to change legislation, if you're in a position to start to change policy, then really start to be intentional about changing those policies to include us.
Absolutely. I just was reading a study. I won't put it out there what study it was, but it was about LGBT community, but it was like a 300 some page study. Mm-hmm. And they talked about a lot of different things, HIV, they talked about homelessness and all these different issues that affect our community. And I was scrolling down because I was trying to get some statistics on trans men of color and homelessness, trans men of color and HIV, and there was no category for us.
Right.
And I was like, well, wait a minute. Well, you can't tell me that there's no trans folks of color that's homeless. Like, no way. Like, so it's like, speaking volumes to like, hey, maybe I should send these people an email. Yo, where's the study about trans men of color? Like,
right. Call your public health department, call your local public health department and ask them for this data and tell them if this data doesn't exist, then why?
Absolutely.
That way we can start to spark those conversations in different places, but it needs to happen.
Right. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So is there a word of advice or anything that you would like to say for somebody that's listening?
Word of advice, be you. And right here, I want to really specifically talk to my trans community and LGBT youth altogether. Be you, because you're the only one that can be the best you that can exist. You're the only one that exists of you. Just stand in your power and know that there is a place in this world for you, and you need to claim that space. Like, really claim that space that belongs to you. For my transmasculine folks, stand up, be you. Stand up, be strong. You're valid. And if no one has told you that they love you, I do. And we're here for you. I got plenty of hugs.
Yes, I love it. Love it. Love it. So this is the part of the show where I ask a random question of our guests.
Oh, random questions. Yes. I love them.
So this list is continuously growing. So for now, I have 18 random questions. It could or could not be about anything we talked about today.
Okay.
So you just give me a number and then I read out that question.
7, of course.
7. Oh, this is a perfect question for you.
I'm lucky. It's got to be 7.
Yeah. So the question number 7 is, what was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Favorite cartoon as a kid was Gummy Bears.
Of course, a man that loves to eat them and loves to watch them. Okay.
Absolutely. You would think that it was Superman, but it was actually Gummy Bears.
Gummy Bears. I don't even remember a Gummy Bear cartoon.
Oh, yeah. It had a whole song. Gummy bears bouncing here and there and everywhere. Oh, believe me, I know it.
And you know the song. And you hella grown. You still remember that song? Okay, that was Absolutely. Your favorite cartoon. You were serious.
Yes, it was. Yes.
All right. Lucky, I want to say thank you for being a guest on this show. I admire you. I love you, brother. And I want to see the great work that you do in this community. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep motivating us, keep working for us. And thank you. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me, brother. And I appreciate the work that you do as well. I think that it's super important, a lot of what you're doing for those youth, man. And definitely thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the platform and being able to talk to folks.
Thank you for listening to today's show. Once again, I'm your host. My name is Sean Aaron. Be sure to be sure to share this show out with folks in your networks. If you would like to connect with us, be sure to follow us on Instagram or Facebook. You can also visit our website at dembois.org. That's DEMBOIS.org. If you think you would make a great guest on this show, or maybe you have a question for myself or a future guest that you would like to hear answered on the show, please send an email to hello@dembois.org That's HELLO at dembois.org. Until next time, take care.